Well, Till, you were sitting backstage. I guess there's a few overlaps you could sense in terms of the overall topics of what the place of one aspect, one tool being defense to create stability. What else can we use to do stability in our societies?
Yeah, I mean, I was already listening in to the previous panel of Ms. Bosbach, and I was like, oh, I would like to have a panel discussion here on that, because there it sounded like stability mainly comes from some market mechanisms and business doing their job without any regulation, and then society benefiting from it. And I would say that stability, one of the key components of a stable society, has to do with inequality and with kind of fairness for people who live in that society. And I strongly believe that what we are observing at the moment, the push towards populism, an increasing right-wing extremism in Germany and many other countries, also has to do with the fact that many people feel like the economic system is not working for them anymore, feel like, and it's not just a feeling, right? We can see that empirically. In the last 30 years, 38% of the wealth accumulation went to the top 1%. We see that since 2020, billionaires' wealth increased by 60%, by 50%, while 60% of the population got poorer in the world. And all of these things fuel a sentiment in societies that something doesn't work out. And therefore, I think we're currently in a situation where not only we established an economic system that is extracting from the planet, that is increasing, that is extracting the planetary boundaries, transgressing those and kind of plundering the planet, but at the same time not being able to deliver well-being for the broad population. And I therefore think that this topic of inequality and fairness is a crucial one if we look on society from a systemic lens, both with regard to business cases, but also with regard to the transformation we have ahead of us.
It's interesting, you know, I've read your book, so Till has written a book called Tax the Rich. It was my bedside reading for about a month.
It's only 120 pages, so the month.
Yeah, well, I read it very carefully. But yeah, so I think, I know a lot of your theses here, but can you go into the details? I want you to unpack the economic theory behind this, because I mean, the Club of Rome has put forward papers since the 70s. I've also read that book. It was in my grandfather's shed, actually, funnily enough. So tell me about the economic theory that supports the fact we can have equality and still have enough for everyone to go around, and why that makes strong economies potentially.
Yeah, and I mean, if you mentioned The Limits to Growth, a book published in 1972, right? So over 50 years ago. And that was still particularly arguing that we can't continue with the extraction of our world in the way we did back then, that we will both run into material limits, but also into the limits of what the planet can absorb. And I think 50 years later, we see that many of these theses became reality. We see we're transgressing planetary boundaries. We see we're not living within the planet's scope. But we also see that there is a social component that's much stronger emphasized today than it was 50 years ago. We know today that it's not just everyone sitting in the same boat and polluting the planet and having CO2 emissions and using materials, but we know that globally, you know, the top 10%, probably all of us, are responsible for 50% of the emissions, and the top 1% are responsible for 17% of the CO2 emissions. And I think if we don't include this inequality also with regard to who causes a climate crisis, we will fail in solving it. Because we are in a moment of time when we speak about what has changed in the last 50 years, what's changed since The Limits to Growth. We know that the transformation we see ahead of us is a transformation into a very unequal society. And we know that the transformation ahead of us will, in the short term, have certain costs. You know, we often speak in Germany about 600 billion in the next 10 years, 700, 800 billion in the next 10 years. And the question is really who bears these costs? Who is responsible for paying the transformation in the short term and making sure that people are not left behind? And I think that is the crucial component. Now, when you speak about the theory behind it or what's behind it, we have more and more research that shows shows the effect of increasing inequality, of people feeling that their economic future is not secure, and the link to increasing populism. It's not, as you know, sometimes you feel like if you listen to certain people from Bavaria, where I'm from, or in other cases, it feels like people vote AfD because they are worried that they can't eat their schnitzel anymore in 10 years or can't go 150 on highways. But there is very often a material basis beyond the sentiment of people why they tend to vote towards extremist forces. And therefore I think we know that the transformation ahead of us will produce winners and losers, and we know that if we go into a business as usual model and just let market forces go on and just let, without any regulation, steering or even redistribution, just continue that pathway, we will not only fail in the transformation, but also fail in securing the very foundation of our societies, namely the democracy. And last point on that, because you asked about the economic theory and maybe also in separation to what has been said in the previous panel. We are in a situation where we know the things in economic terms that have to be done are more costly than just continuing business as usual in the short term, right? Like building up hydrogen power networks, building up renewable energy, building up all the infrastructure that will help us to establish an economic system which reduces CO2 and towards a well-being economy, will in the short term be more expensive than the business as usual case. And in that sense, I see you want to step in.
I do want to interrupt you. You're putting in lots of good points, but I want to challenge you on a couple of things because,
yes,
as you know, I didn't agree with everything in your book.
That's good.
That's a good starting point for conversation. But there are the arguments out there which have merit, which say, look at the foundation of democracy in the US. I'm not talking about what's happening now, but back in the early years as America was being born as a modern nation. You had the Rockefellers. You had the Carnegies, who were, of course, extremely rich, but they reinvested in society. Are these people not creating value? I mean, just perfectly on the redistribution comment you said before.
Yeah, but I mean, you always, first of all, back then, you could even argue from a very traditional Keynesian perspective why redistribution is necessary, right? Because back then there was a society being built up that had the purchasing power within the society to buy the products that were produced by these people. So if you have an accumulation of capital at the top and thereby don't have the kind of capital within society to create the demand needed for the production society, then you don't have innovation, you don't have investment, you don't have businesses building up either. That's why, particularly in the time you mentioned, income taxes were partly at 90% in the US, right? I mean, we had much higher taxes at the top than we have today, also because not only for moral reasons, but for systemic risk reasons, that there needs to be a basis of people creating the demand to buy the products that are being produced in societies. And of course, we have today great philanthropists, people doing great stuff for the world. But it needs to be democratically regulated what happens to the world and can't be left in the hands of a few. Nowadays, the term techno-feudalists is running around, right? We see how dangerous it is at a certain point. The accumulation of wealth is not an accumulation to increase consumption power, but it is an accumulation of wealth that increases political power. And I think that's the danger in all of that.
Okay, on this then, we have 1:02 left, so let's see what we
already
do.
Trying to speak very fast, but...
How do we do this today? Are we doing it well in any countries, and how do we make it happen without a backlash? Because, it's a personal right. People can say, I earned my money, get your hands off my money.
Of course, but we have great initiatives going on in the world. First, we have a G20 initiative initiated by Brazil for making the case for a billionaire's tax, right? Only affecting 3,000 people in the world, but making an income of over 250 billion. That's already a great step, and I wish countries like Germany were more on the offense getting behind that, because many, many countries are that. Internationally regulated. We have seen the example of the minimum tax on OECD level for companies. That's a role model also for individual taxation. That's the international level, and then on the national level, there are different factors one can do, particularly for Germany. I would say an important thing, inheritance tax. We inherit 400 billion per year. Tax of that is only 10 billion. That's something even the Liberal Party should get behind of, because we want that the own work is benefiting oneself and not a rentier economy where your own benefits depend on the work of your parents.
On that note, I think it's a nice way to finish. We've got some applause in the... they've already done it for me.
Thank
I don't
you.
have to say anything. Till Kellerhof, it was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for the invitation.